And I didn't
Ah,
start recording now. I think you're recording anyway, Patsy, but I'm recording now. Anyway,
oh, I paused mine. It's all right. Yeah. Okay, Ray. Sorry.
Lots of recordings. Right. Good morning, dear friends. And we're coming to nearly the end of February. Isn't that amazing? I saw the snowdrops and the crocus is out. Woohoo! Very good. It reminds me of that terrible joke of the two trade unionists sitting on top of the bus. And one said, the daffodils are out. And the other said, will that affect the rate of air pay? I know, terrible, isn't it? But you know me. So, today, dear friends, we are going to have a very interesting talk by our friend Gordon. So, Gordon, whenever you're ready, it's over to
Right.
you.
Well, I better explain. When Patsy said she was sort of the speaker, I realized I'd got a half finished art, what I thought would be an article, which I find very interesting, but that's been no guarantee that anybody else will. Um, I'll be needing to refer to bits of paper, and I hope that's not too offensive to your hearing. And if my voice drops, please let me know, and I can, shout a bit more. My hearing aids work very well for me, but they don't seem to have the right effect on others. Yeah. Anyway, to begin. Um, A lifetime ago, I moved from working in a little northern town down to London, and these were the sort of Carnaby Street, long King's Road times, and where I thought lots of things were happening, and maybe if I went down there, things would also, I'd find plenty to do, um, and made the journey. And sure enough, I look back and I think to myself, um, well, I never was more socially active. I tried everything I could and had what would seem to be good friends all over the place. Um, and I thought I should be feeling a lot better. But in fact, I felt rather cut off in a way I couldn't explain. And sometime in this period, and I think it would count as as a depression, a state of deep depression. Um, I happened upon a poem, which has stayed lodged with me ever since, and I'll begin with that. I hope I can remember it, and it's by um, oh God. Matthew Arnold. Um, and if I can get started. So, yes, in this sea of life, an island with echoing straits between us, shown, thrown, better read it. Dotting the water, shoreless watery wild, we mortal millions live alone. The islands feel the enclasping flow, and then its endless bounds they know. But when the moon their hollows lights, and when are swept by balms of spring, and in the glens on starry nights the nightingales divinely sing, and lovely notes from shore to shore across the sounds and channels pour. Oh, then a longing like despair is to their furthest caverns sent, for surely then we feel we were part of a single continent. Around us spreads a watery plain. Oh, might our marches meet again. Who ordered that their longing's fire should be as quickly cooled? Who renders vain their great desire? A God their severance ruled, and bound between the shores to be the unplumbed, salt, estranging sea. Now, I should say, first of all, that the poem did give me some comfort in the thought that I wasn't alone in any sense of isolation, that there were others like me, and able others. I mean, Matthew Arnold was a figure of, he's an established poet, but active in administration. The year before this poem, he had been the 1851 industrial exhibition, and he was very much involved in adjusting school curriculum to meet what seemed to be more new needs. But for all that, a man who had come, he still felt that there was a better place, that he had been once, and now no longer was able to get there. Well, um, asserting ourselves as individuals has had a long history. My first meeting it was in studying the history of ancient Athens as it was, and the writers at the time were having a struggle to find a word for guilt, for conscience, and that this occurred at the same time as Athens was developing its new democracy, a thing that was it is not a coincidence. The two were related. The individual now had a position that was expected of him. And you can find echoes. I mean, what the effect of Jesus is teaching that, all men are important in God's eyes must have been very difficult for the people at the time. The scribes and the Pharisees just didn't do it. Um, and there's always a bit like art history, for example, and until something like 1200 in the Middle Ages, um, painters in particular, but builders of cathedrals weren't known by their creator, but in, let's say, that period about 1200, you get the artists' names appearing, and this leads quickly into the Renaissance. Um, and then um, there seemed to be a very rapid development of individual protest in the 1500s, and the most obvious is Luther's "Here I stand, I can do no other, so help me God." And he was taking on not just the church, the Pope and the church, but also leaders who were engaged with that. And from that time, of course, you find it's a history of people making. Galileo was another, but in this country, you have the people who are so determined to express themselves that they would undergo all kinds of dreadful tortures to just to have their say. Well, it was a case of everyone has his own opinion. So it was not surprising that the thinkers of the time tried to work out whether there was anything that could be um, taken as absolute truth and work out from there. Um, and the names usually come people like Descartes and Francis Bacon, um, where it's attributed to Descartes the saying "cogito ergo sum." I think, therefore I am, and he reckoned that his personal view was a place to start with, and he could detach himself from the rest of his experience and try and share that with others, and this gave him the power and the understanding to know what was happening, what they all could share, and manipulate it, development. And of course, gradually this led into a whole period of rapid, what do you call it, technology and industrialization. And again, you can see this happening with increasing rigor. Um, in the 1700s, you have the American Declaration of Independence, and not long after, gosh, what's his name? Tom Paine, um, talking about managing, responsibility of a country to manage for the benefits of its inhabitants. Um, of course, there was a lot of um, disagreement about this very early on, and the most obvious example is John Donne's poem. No man is an island entire unto itself. Each is a part of the continent. And yet within a few years of that, George Fox comes along and says, stop listening to others and think for yourselves, express yourselves. Um, and so, this gradual split of the individual who is right, and the rest just widens. Um, Let me just um, yeah. Oh yes, I came across two interesting examples of the gap between the technology minded and the people who still had a great regard for the personal sense. Um, I found this in a book about Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, a, a little haiku by, and I don't know how they pronounce his name, it looks like Basho, B-S-H-O. And his verse is, when I look carefully, I see the Natsuma blooming by the hedge. And a poem by Tennyson on the same theme, flower in the crannied wall, I pluck you out of the crannies, hold you here, root and all in my hand, little flower. But if I could understand what you are, root and all in all, I should know what God and man is. The one is expressing the experience, and the other is look past the experience to an explanation of how the world works. Um, the So the reason and the heart have continued from then to drift further and further apart. And it's not a case of people feeling like islands. It's more like asteroids just drifting through space, volcanic, and no feeling for anything else. And one of the big problems, and this was really what I was interested in, is this business of loneliness, which many now regard as a disease, and its results apparent all over. Um, there's a quotation I've got very much in mind by a wise man, a philosopher I was lucky enough to know in his last years. And this is, how has it come about that the more able we've become in manipulating nature for our own desires, and at the same time, we can find no meaning in it? That we've got this wonderful understanding, but what's it all about? What's it all about? Um, there's no denying that technology has done wonders. I mean, prefer, there is food apparently for the whole world if we knew how to share it. Communication, I can look at somebody across the world and have a reasonable talk to them. Um, Transport, whatever we look at, technology has done so much for the world um, that, well, it's easy to get hooked onto it. Um, but, well, if I have a problem, I can Google it, find out who somebody is or what. But even this nowadays can't always be relied on for the truth. Um, and, it's one's become sucked into it. I find the internet is very like the spider's net. It sort of gulls you in and creates a funny cyberspace personality of you, which the internet just sucks dry from, now artificial intelligence looks as though it's going to take that even further. Um, I know when I drive a car, um, I cease to be properly myself. I came across that when I'd lived in London for many years and drove around, drove around at a time, even when I could park in the centre of London with no cost, no problem at all. Um, to over time, years later, when I moved from London out into Sussex, and I'd travel into London, and I used to find that once I started driving inside the city, my driving changed. It was much more aggressive and taking, far more risks. The little machine was making me, not me driving it entirely. Um, it, the world is so difficult nowadays. Um, But I'd been brought up as a Methodist, and Methodists really just go for the singing. I mean, you go to a service and you're there to sing songs, and the chap can spout away for a while if that's what you like. But what we were there for, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because singing does bring people together. We were there for the sing songs, for the hymns, and I remember one came to mind recently, and it's a verse I must have sung many times without thinking about it. Eternal love, forever full, forever flowing free, forever shared, forever whole, a never ebbing sea. And he is making the same metaphor. Um, Arnold saw the sea not entirely, but he saw the sea as a separation, something that destroys you. Whereas Whittier, a Quaker, um, composed that poem at a time when he was the figurehead for slave, um, getting rid of slavery, and um, very much part of a young um, young country trying to do good. The Civil War was about to start. What I didn't realize at the time was that this verse of his, was composed within a couple of years of Arnold's poem. And so you offer this, do you become an intellectual outcast with um, Matthew Arnold, or do you go following Whittier? And in fact, they're not. They can be taken together. What's the word I'm thinking of? But the, the Arnold states the problem, and Whittier offers the solution. But all right, once you get there, you're left with the big question, but what is love? It is not hereafter. Present mirth, that's present laughter, whatever. It's the next consideration is to what counts as love. What is actually that you can do? When I was looking into this a bit more, I came across the practices of a film star, and he said that the first thing he tries to do is to take a full note of what the other is wearing. And I thought, that's a nice high thing. And to my horror, I find even when I sit down and we've got a visitor, I don't take any notice of what they're wearing or whatever. And there is another saying of Owen Barfield, who you can see I have a lot of time for, was that he said words only acquire their meaning along with other words. Words do have some significance on their own, but very little outside until working with others. And he suggested perhaps that's true of people also. Anyway, that's me finished, I think. I've cut short a lot of what I'd written down, but there we are. That's the topic. If you have any thoughts about what I've said, or if it's already pretty obvious to you. Oh, gone silent.
Carry on, Angela.
Yeah, very profound. Thank you. Yeah. I grew up, I learnt French at O level and I always liked it, which is interesting because my second husband was, this is another story, but, a black Senegalese Muslim man. We're divorced. He couldn't stand being called a nigger at the bus stop in the Neville Road, but that's another story. But the French, they always have, and the Chinese do as well. Because I taught I went to Guangzhou with a 30-day visa and taught B.Ed honour students who were going to do a degree with the University of Huddersfield in English. They have hurry slowly. So they're very keen, the Chinese, on contradictory ideas. And it seems to me, maybe, Gordon, that's the same kind of essence. That's how it struck me. The two French that I liked was plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So that's one thought that was triggered in my mind by what you were saying. The other one was, which I think is you're also saying, qui attend une cloche attend qu'un son. If you're only listening to one bell ringing, following one school of thought, you're only going to hear one sound. And the implication of that is you're not going to get anywhere. So thank you, Gordon. That's what your thought triggered in me.
My other half is Chinese, and I spent 3 years teaching there. But you're right, they do have a different outlook on things. I was going to say, I have a theory that people are either French inclined or German inclined, and my life has been tied up with Germans. I think by nature you go one way or the other. It's a little kind of prejudice I may have, but I feel it.
No, I think you might find your own way. I mean, one of my stories, I was born in 1939, and my dad had these little stories when he joined up. Recruiting officer, religion, my dad, atheist. Recruiting officer, very stern. Religion, my dad, equally clear, atheist. And then he would laugh and laugh. And he said, you know what? He wrote down Church of England. Now, his hero was actually his great-grandpa, who was a Methodist, Gordon, and liked to sing. So you were triggering off all kinds of very profound thoughts in me. Thank you.
That's satisfaction. Thank you. Oh, I've also this idea that I think, in fact, your mind can hold two contradictory and I think this may be a way of our being able to change opinions, change outlook. As I said, the Whittier verse, I could quite happily sing along for years without realizing quite that it meant something different to something else I was thinking.
I was once having a interesting discussion with a few friends at yearly meeting, basically because I said that I believe in two things about I am a Quaker in all that it can be said is a Quaker, but equally I am a socialist, which means to me I am a Quaker socialist. I'm part of the Quaker socialist group also, and I had an interesting discussion which got a little heated because there were a few friends who were saying that to them socialism was to do with the Marxist dictator, that word anyway, and that they were two opposing views, so I couldn't be a true Quaker if I was also a socialist, which I found a little sad because they couldn't understand that I believed in two, and I believed in they were together. That to me that was a simplicity, but to those who I was speaking to, they got a little heated that I would think that these two things should be brought together.
I've got something that relates to that, and thank you, Gordon, for taking us on this journey and looking at historic roots when a way of thinking emerged at different times. And I was thinking, pondering my own reaction, and the thought went through my head: the unexamined life is not worth living, as a quote. And I couldn't quite think who said it, so I looked it up, and it's thought to come from Socrates. And Wikipedia, in talking about it, leads straight on into Socrates being excluded through death from his society as a result of his examining his own life and, deciding that it's fine to disagree with the state, and the state saying, "Oh no, you don't. You can't." It's sort of basically having an interdict on examining the mind and being free to think what you think. And we wouldn't have a scientific culture without minds being inquiring and examining things from multiple sides. And the Indians are quite proud of having 6 different philosophical systems. It's almost like the faces of a cube from which you can examine life in completely different ways, depending on which side you come in from. And one of the systems is yoga, and that's characterized in the system of six systems as the philosophy of direct experience, whereas other philosophical systems are about thought or logic or whatever. And I certainly couldn't tell you what they all are, but I think um, I think it's so important that we that we do examine and explore and give ourselves freedom to do that, if only to figure out what works best for us, and what's true and useful. It's not entirely clear that we are created with a particular point of view in mind. We appear to be here after a lot of evolution, and the way that we think seem in a lot of ways of looking at the world is part of simply giving us a faculty for navigating the world, for survival and for making most use of the world. But others, you have Viktor Frankl, who survived a concentration camp and talks about man's search for meaning. So, it seems to be quite natural to explore how it is that we see the world and to make meaning from it. Sorry, your musings cause me to wander off as well. Thank you.
One of the problems with loneliness, which I didn't, push through, is that these people feeling, I'm not talking about the kind of people who've been able to think intellectual, but just the mass of people who are in and out of a sense of loneliness to try to deal with it. And one of the things which, to a certain extent, I felt at one time, I was like wallpaper in other people's lives. As long as I had a good pattern, that was it. But if I wanted their attention, I had to do something to draw their attention. And more than once, I've seen some, youngster, I've heard of the youngster claiming that they commit a crime in order to draw attention to themselves. And, you feel if that's, asteroids are a better image of what their experience of life is. If you hit something, you're there. That takes notice of you in some way. Of course, there are differences in the two meanings of being lonely. One's a good thing. You do need to be on your own to look at, but that requires more self-confidence than the other.
There are very many reports to show that big cities can make people feel lonely, feel not part of that society, because people seem to rush around to be always doing something important. If you go to any street in England, which has large cities, and especially London, having lived there myself for a number of years, the people always think of London as a large cosmopolitan place. But as we all know, it's made up of small places that some people never leave their part of London. I once took a number of children out to a to camping in a place called Hay and Wye, which is in Wales. And some of these young people had just not been outside of London, but they hadn't been outside of their part of London. So to them, being out there, being camping in Wales was frightening because they their connections to everything had been kind of knocked aside a bit. And I understand that in a lot of places, having suffered loneliness myself, of course, and I think everybody does sometimes. But it's the way we understand, it's the way we become part of others. And Quakerism does that for me, shows me that we are a loving community in that sense. But yes, we do need time for reflection, and we do need time to understand where we stand, which to some people can be hard. Or have I completely misunderstood you, Gordon?
One of the I've been so quiet because I thought, I so enjoyed Gordon's talk, but it opens up so very many channels of thinking. I'm sitting here feeling a bit stunned, but one of the things that opened up for me was this issue of loneliness and being alone. And I was remembering when I first went to live in London, I was very shocked the way on the streets people kept bumping into me until a more experienced Londoner said to me, well, just don't look at them. Just don't look at anybody. Just keep walking. That's what they're doing. And I thought, well, there's going to be a load of massive collisions. There wasn't one. From then on, I realised that for some reason, maybe somebody here can explain it to me, but for some reason, in a city like London, if you don't think about anyone else, but you just pursue your route, you don't hit each other. Whereas if I'm shopping where I live in Bristol, in my area of Bristol, which would be on the Gloucester Road, as I approach another person, we meet each other's faces, so to speak, and we may smile or we may glare, but we usually smile. And there is this acknowledgement, but also there's a kind of conscious negotiation of our spaces. Whereas in London, it's like you switch that off and you go onto a form of automatic pilot in order to be able to move around. Now, if anybody can explain this to me, I would be really interested because I've pondered it for years. But I've got a feeling it's connected. I hope it is. I believe it is to what Gordon was saying about being alone and not being alone. Any help with my ponderings here would be most welcome.
Yeah, I do have something. I studied. So there's an American writer, Scott Peck, who wrote a couple of influential books. The one that a lot of people in the hippie area read his book, The Road Less Traveled. And there was a follow-on book called The Different Drum. And The Road Less Traveled was very much about an individual's journey. And the different drum struck off in a different direction. And it wasn't so much actually about I heard a different drum and I wandered off in a different direction. It was about people's longing for community and a sense of belonging. And he, as a psychologist, he found himself doing workshops with, actually at the time, he's doing group work with alcoholics. And he kind of observed that people need to have a sense of belonging, but he also observed that it could be a false sense of belonging, that one might be, I'm a something or other, Eton graduate, or I'm a resident of a particular town. I feel get a sense of identity from that. And then he talks about a sense of, at some point, you may see through your own feeling of belonging and find yourself feeling separate. That's where this starts to, the sense of loneliness can come in, and that sense of not belonging to that group can lead to, he described it generically as chaos. You have chaotic thoughts because you are no longer blindly a member of some church or group or religion or military or country or whatever, and no longer actually able to make people be other than that, one of us or not one of us. And so there's a whole work about that, Patsy, about how people can have, and he called it pseudo community, when you identify with a group and get some sense of rank, belongingness or whatever. And it's only after going through chaos that one might emerge into a sense of deeper connection, which he simply called community, true community, where you feel a different sense of harmony. And there's a whole book about this, Patsy. It can but he was definitely distinguishing between membership and non-membership of that group, and whether that membership was real and deep and authentic, or was just based on basically simply a belief. Perhaps a difference between belief and faith would be a similar thing. So anyway, thank you for raising the issue, Gordon. And I wasn't trying to help in any way, Patsy, but just to
interesting.
show some context.
Mm.
We're lost in our thoughts.
Yes, what I was thinking about there was immediately after you spoke was you mentioned people with alcohol issues, and one of the reasons I personally was unable to engage with Alcoholics Anonymous, I think, was that I couldn't identify with their vision of myself and my relation to the universe, if you like, to the rest of the world. It just didn't fit me any better than the society I had been living in when I developed alcohol problems. I felt an utter misfit there. It simply took me many years, so I was in my late 40s, before I was able to really develop any sense of community anywhere. And yeah, I think just some of us take a long time to grow up. Maybe that's the simplistic thing to say. But when people present you with a particularly strong affirmation of an identity to which they feel you should belong, I think that can also lead to a form of mental chaos, because you think they must be right because there's so many of them. They must be right, but in you they're not, and this failure to fit. I mean, I know this for a fact that many people do kill themselves for this reason. They simply can't make it. So they can't find the other side to make it too. And so I felt really privileged that I've found at least two other sides, two other shores to which I feel able to be attached. And these two shores do have links. So, but I'm also very aware now. I like others here. I'm in my 80s. I'm also very aware that I'm actually alone. In the end, I'm in my own little boat. I'm on my own. I'm going to be reaching that great fall, or whatever we should call it, on my own. But it's still been of enormous value to belong, or to feel I belong, to more than one group of people, and also of belief structures, which give me strength and empowerment in my mind. It makes me feel able to go to many different spaces. So I'm often amazed. I'm amazed on a daily basis on the ability that we're given to do this. To be an old person, but also to feel like we're still a child, and the ability, at least in our minds, connect with other people, and yet still to be alone. Yeah, I think I'm beginning to waffle, which I'm so sorry about that, but it's quite true that I'm just amazed at how much we are given in ourselves. I'm trying to think of a better way to put this, really. I think I'm just saying I'm grateful for the kind of mind that we are given and our ability to do things with it.
Patsy, what I'm hearing a little bit from you is a sense of isolation or aloneness, but a comfort in that, that's taking responsibility for your life and thinking about it, and not just jumping into identity with some group because of whatever. And I can relate a personal experience. When I was young, I was at my local church that my parents went to, an evangelical church, and there's this really inspirational guest speaker one day, and he was really inspiring, brilliant, and so I felt moved to go up to him and say, "Thank that was just such an incredible sermon. It really touched me." But he sort of leaned over me and sort of raised his hand in the air, metaphorically at the very least, and said, "Do you have a personal experience of an experience of the Lord Jesus Christ as your personal Savior?" And I sort of, I didn't actually fall back in horror, but that was definitely not my experience. And the way he was saying it was, you're missing out if you haven't got this experience and aren't a member of the true faith. And I wasn't remotely mature or articulate enough to be able to respond, but it certainly got me thinking. And one of the thoughts was, well, what about all the other people with all the other faiths and religions? are they all saved or not saved or what? We have to figure this stuff out properly, not just to subscribe to the person who uses a form of religious emotion to enlist. Was how I eventually saw what I felt his inspirational, charismatic preaching as being. I'm not sure I feel I can say this in a Quaker meeting. I'm not sure I could get away with it in other churches or religions. But again, it comes back to a taking responsibility for one's own feelings, and then exploring. What am I in the world for? What do I want to make of it? How do I make best use of myself?
I really am grateful to Gordon. You've you've really made me think along a lot of different lines in a very short time today. really, really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I would say thanks for provoking thought rather than for being merely charismatic.
I don't do charisma.
Oh no, but a lot of people get led astray by it. I'm thinking of recent elections in America.
Very frightening.
Let's not get onto that.
Gordon, you said you had a lot more material and you'd only covered part of it. So I have a question, which is, on thinking, if in 10 minutes time we're offline and you're thinking, oh, I should have said that, what is the something that you would like us to reflect more on?
I think the thing is we're realizing that verse of Whittier's, which has been living with me in a way, and I've had taken no notice of it. And it's there to meet the other issues that Arnold raises about, the lives we live alone. Yeah, yeah.
Someone said once that, and I don't remember who, because it's kind of in the vague mists of times. I think they were discussing the fact that we're alone when everybody's alone when they're asleep. You don't, you cannot enter other people's dreams, and you cannot enter other people's thoughts. That we're alone in our thoughts, because no one can actually kind of suddenly leap into our brain and go, no, you got that wrong, type of thing, So it's we come later to things than we have when we were younger. Our views and our thoughts change to other things a lot in life, from a small child to a teenager to the adult you are today. I would hopefully say that your views have changed a lot in that progression.
Well, certainly the move I made from this northern town, Halifax, to London brought home to me a great deal that I wasn't aware of before. Halifax was an extraordinary, it would almost say petrified community, very warm in itself. But I was there 5 years and tried to do many things while I was there. One of them was join the local choir, which was a good choir. I went every week for 5 years, and not until the fifth year did anybody speak to me.
Oh,
And I began to realize, well, the classes I taught, small grammar school, in one class there were 5 cousins at the same school, and the number of names that were local based was quite astonishing. It was, I think the changes have taken place now, but at that time it was quite a contained community, um, and it wasn't easy to be accepted there. I think you really had to be there you were an incomer for a long time,
Mm.
very well aware of it too. And of course, coming to London, oh, totally different.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, in Devon and Cornwall, if you're not there sometimes for a long time, you can still remain a grockle for quite a few years.
Hey,
Anyway, where are we? Oh, any further comments or questions, friends? Right then. The paternal question, Patsy. What are we thinking next Friday?
Next Friday, we're going to be interviewing. We were going to be interviewing Hilary Hubbard, who, of course, has been a Quaker for many years. She's not going to be able to join us, so instead, we are going to be interviewing a newcomer to our Quaker meeting. His name instantly, just at that moment, I lost the poor woman's name. But I'm sure you'll all be familiar with this happening to you. Just give me a second. I've only been talking to her earlier today because seriously, she has been helping me to revise. We're trying to do better versions for our meetings notices, you see, and she's very much more technologically accomplished than me, and she's been brilliant. Her name is Sophie, Sophie Shirt, and she is a newcomer to our meeting, although she has been a Quaker for a while, I believe. And she's going to be talking to us as an interviewee next week. So I'm looking forward to that. And I hope next week too, I shall be able to recall her name a little bit quicker than that.
Right then, friends. It is time to go for lunch or other sorts of things that you may be doing. Yes, I have an interesting meeting this afternoon with Kathy Nile because Christopher Denham had lots and lots and lots of papers from the area meeting, local meeting, library committee, and all this lot. So they're all beside me now in 3 large boxes, and we're going to spend a little time sorting them out. So real fun job there, I can tell you. Not.
good luck.
Good luck.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I will see you. If I don't see you all before, I will see you next Friday.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thank you,
Gordon.
friends.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Gordon. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you.
Agreed.